19th-century London. Its gas street lamps, thick fog, pollution, and claustrophobic streets inspired histories and legends. The largest urban environment in the world at the time, London boasted rapid industrialization, significant job opportunities, brutal class division, crowded slums, and a fire-breathing, wall-leaping, claw-wielding devil who attacked women in their homes and in the streets, terrorizing a community for some 67 years. Introducing one of the world's first urban legends, his name was Spring-Heeled Jack. I'm Dr. Emily Zarka, and this is Monstrum. Early in the 1800s, reports of a leaping man in the form of a ghostly apparition had already emerged in folklore and rumors, but the flesh and blood creature took form in January 1826, when the Northampton Mercury reported that a masked man with spring boots which enable him to vault over a 10-foot wall was spotted. A man jumping walls in the middle of the night can easily be dismissed as a prank, right? Maybe at first, but in 1837, his behavior and his notoriety changed. That year, multiple women gave statements to the police that they had been violently attacked by a monster who would ring their doorbell or accost them in the street and then tear their clothes with his claws. Since the victims were working-class women, early reports weren't taken as seriously at first. That is until in January 1838, the Lord Mayor of the City of London, Sir John Cowan, read a letter to the press outside his mansion. The anonymous author claimed they wanted to bring reports of a supernatural attacker to the attention of the authorities. He believed the letter's author to be a woman who had become senseless as a result of the strange attacker, and mockingly implored her to write a description of the demon that would enable him to catch him. Now that the mysterious Jack had been discussed by the mayor, a male authority figure of the upper class, the real attention began. A few days later, headlines blamed Spring Jack for the attacks. The West Kent Guardian finally gave the unknown perpetrator a title that stuck: Spring-Heeled Jack. With the papers giving more pages to the figure, rumors and stories of his attacks spread wildly, and Londoners jumped at shadows, convinced Spring-Heeled Jack was coming for them next. Children and adults alike told stories about him. Then in February 20th, 1838, Miss Jane Alsop, the 18-year-old daughter of a gentleman, heard a ringing at her gate and there discovered a man claiming to be a policeman. He announced that they had captured Spring-Heeled Jack and she needed to bring the officer a candle. As Jane did so, the man threw off his cloak and, applying the lighted candle to his breast, presented a most hideous and frightful appearance and vomited forth a quantity of blue and white flame from his mouth, and his eyes resembled red balls of fire. He placed her head under one of his arms and commenced tearing her gown with his claws, which she believed to be made of something metallic. With great violence, he tore at her neck and arms and even removed a quantity of hair from her head. One of her sisters heard her screaming and saw the figure dragging Jane down the stone steps of the house. She barely managed to pull Jane back inside and slam the door. At this time, her sister's dress was nearly torn off, both her combs dragged out of her head. The man continued to knock on the door until they called loudly for the police. Another similar attack by a man of tall, thin, and gentlemanly appearance, wearing a cloak, appeared in papers a little over a week later. Very quickly, Spring-Heeled Jack was labeled an aristocrat. A report on February 27, 1838, in the Morning Herald said that a young servant boy opened the door to find someone of hideous appearance, with a claw-like hand and clothing embroidered with a family crest with the letter W. A family crest, the letter W? Our first clues as to the identity of this leaping legend? An aristocrat, maybe? Someone already notorious? One man in particular was given credit for inspiring the first Spring-Heeled Jack legends, the Marquis of Waterford. Born in April 1811, the young Henry de la Poer Beresford became the third Marquis of Waterford following the death of his parents and older brother. Educated at Eton College, his penchant for mischief and drinking earned him a reputation in the press long before Spring-Heeled Jack leapt into the scene. Reports of the young Marquis smashing windows, offering money to people to fight him, throwing meat out of a butcher shop, and accosting people while naked had appeared in the press, and he was arrested multiple times for drunk and disorderly conduct. In one notable incident in April 1837, after a phantom leaper appeared on the landscape, but before Spring-Heeled Jack had become a legend, the newspaper The Champion says the Marquis and his friends were charged with starting a riot, and subsequently appeared before the court wearing bearskin coats and large cravats. Reports of the young lord's exploits served as regular fodder for the newspapers in 1837. The same year, we see Spring-heeled Jack described as a devil-like gentleman. As stories of the scandalous Marquis circulated, they may have swirled with the emerging persona of Spring-heeled Jack. And it could be in this way the Marquis morphed into a sort of scapegoat Londoners could blame for any evil or inconvenience. Or maybe he was to blame for the crimes. It is certainly possible that the victims of Spring-heeled Jack, who reported being physically assaulted by a man with claws, were really attacked by human male assailants, but chose to blame the faceless Spring-heeled Jack rather than someone they knew. Newspapers of the time at first believed the attacks to be committed by one individual, but as reports increased, many proposed it was likely copycats of the original perpetrator. There were many arrests of men, like Charles Grenville and James Painter, said to be imitating Spring-heeled Jack, frightening women and children. Things turned murderous in 1845, when Maria Davis was attacked in daylight. It was reported that Spring-heeled Jack spit blue and white flame into her face, then threw her over a bridge into an open sewer where she drowned. However, this account cannot be verified by any existing records or death certificates. If this murder never happened, then why suddenly make Jack a killer? Perhaps the story is meant to further scare young women about the dangers of unfamiliar men. Spring-heeled Jack's character can be attributed to the genres in which his stories were published. Legitimate newspapers reported his attacks as hard news, but sensationalized fiction stories depicted him as an avenger of crime. It was hard for people to tell if he was a real threat or not. Victorian London was a brutal place, in both reality and fiction. People were looking for entertainment, and they seemed to like it best served with a healthy dose of violence. A play based on Spring-heeled Jack called Spring-heeled Jack premiered on February 26, 1838. Billed as a melodrama, the creature was brought to the stage at the Royal Pavilion Theatre, which catered to the working class. In 1863, a 40-part Penny Dreadful, a type of pulp fiction story meant to titillate and shock a generally working-class audience, cast Jack as a hero avenging women who suffered injustice and oppression. The masked version of Jack was a tall form whose head and body glowed with a blue phosphorescent fire, from the back of which hung, in graceful folds, a long striped cloak. Multiple times throughout the series, the removal of Jack's mask revealed his identity to the characters in the story who recognize him, but the name is always cut off mid-word as the Marquis, likely a reference to the Marquis, quite possibly the then-deceased Beresford. Newspapers claim Spring-heeled Jack is a terrifying boogeyman who scares people to death or even outright murders them, but in the Penny Dreadful series, he's a prankster that functions as a type of Robin Hood-type figure for the disenfranchised. In one example, he terrifies a girl with his strange and horrible face with fang-like teeth and vomits smoke in her face, causing her to faint. Only after doing this, he writes her a note saying that he tried to save her father from being murdered earlier in the evening and promises to avenge his death. Then he scratches a double cross on her left shoulder, which is a confusing sequence of events, but hey, Penny Dreadfuls were weird. Spring-heeled Jack reached such a level of notoriety that he became the first Victorian urban legend. Everyone either claimed to have encountered him or claimed they knew someone who had. An urban legend is defined as an entertaining but usually horrifying story based on hearsay that is nevertheless widely circulated as true. But in reality, the majority of Spring-heeled Jack's attacks were likely false. But that's what an urban legend is all about. It's about the friend of a friend or my cousin's roommate's boyfriend who had something bad happen to them. In 19th-century London, a time and place of scientific advancement and technological development, but also abject poverty and income inequality, Spring-heeled Jack gave the people something to hold on to, a mystery that could not be solved by mere science or even solid police work. His custom footwear constituted a technological marvel, yet the paranormal components to his story nodded to age-old superstitions. Unlike other monsters of the time, Spring-heeled Jack was homegrown, prowling the streets where they lived, not off in some foreign country or remote location. He was local, marvelous, fear-inducing, inspiring. Spring-heeled Jack manifested the fears of the development of urban spaces and the upheaval of social classes and lifestyle changes city life afforded. Some scholars argue that Victorian England's seemingly insatiable desire for performative violence was rooted in the need to keep people from acting on their real needs for violence. Figures like Spring-heeled Jack may have served as an emotional catharsis. Perhaps this is also why so many of the monstrous creatures in this century appear human or are human. Frankenstein's creature, vampires, Sweeney Todd, mummies, Mr. Hyde, Dorian Gray, the list goes on. And of course, there was the very real monster whose brutal crimes quickly came to overshadow Spring-Heeled Jack, Jack the Ripper. This makes me think about why we've seen Spring-Heeled Jack appear again in popular culture. Most recently, he's appeared in a comic series, a graphic novel, and an award-winning book. Part of this comes from the increased popularity of stories set in highly stylized Victorian settings, like steampunk, but part of me wonders if, like the Victorians, we too are searching for an outlet for our own dark desires. Finally, in this representative, pseudo-historical man-beast whose story is set in the Industrial Revolution and thus the birth of the modern world, we see another kind of birth, that of the urban legend. You're welcome, Bloody Mary and sewer alligator. Sir John Cohen. Did I say Hersey?
Yeah.
Herstory.